Hello, everyone. I'm Pari. Welcome to Living Your Best Life with Eddie Stone, founder and CEO of Touchstone Essentials. Hello, Eddie.
Hello, Perry. So nice to be with you and the good folks we have listening to us this evening.
Thank you for being here with us too, because people are enjoying listening to our shows too. They get feedback from us.
It was fun. I think the last show we did, we talked about the new vegan non-meat burgers that are out there, and that created. It was interesting. I saw some comments on the YouTube, but I also had some people that connected via direct messaging. So that was an interesting subject. I guess it's one of people been thinking about it, right? People been wanting to try these fake hamburgers.
And then some said they will never try that too, because it maybe not that good.
Yeah, I understand that because they are lab made, right? And so certainly it's not the kind of thing you want to be eating regularly. I almost anything you can do on an occasion, but people can tend to get into habits and ruts and eat stuff like that too frequently. So,
Eddie, today's topic, I find it very interesting. Healthy foods that you shouldn't eat. There is such things too.
There is such things, and I actually just we're publishing a blog article about this subject because there is a consciousness that people have, right? I think in general there's a little more mind-body awareness in the world today, or a lot of the world, maybe not everywhere, but there's more mindfulness, and people are thinking about things. And at the same time, what I find is big businesses, like, for example, big food or big agro or whatever, they sort of hear the words people are using and they use them to sell them stuff that perhaps isn't quite what people think. And I'll give you an example of this. My dad, who really tries to think about his food, right? He'll see something in the grocery store, or he'll see something on a menu, and he'll call me. And he's in his 70s, and so sometimes it takes a little extra time to explain things. But you can read something sometimes and think, "Oh, that's what I need," and it turns out that's really not the answer. And so I'll give you. There's certain things that I see that I kind of call them warning signs. For example, when I see the word low fat on a label, most of the time that's going to mean high sugar. Because when you take fat out of a food, the flavor profile can become very bland. And part of the way when we take food in, there's something called mouthfeel. So for example, a company like us that makes a green powder and a protein powder, we think about when people mix that with water, or maybe they mix it with almond milk or whatever they do, and they drink it, what is the mouthfeel like? What is the texture? Because if people find a texture to be too much, right, it makes too big of an impression, then they fatigue on it pretty quickly. And if they find a texture is weak, they fatigue on that as well. So you got to find a sweet spot for people, right? And so when you remove fat from something, you remove a really critical component of mouthfeel that people enjoy. When we eat fat, it's not just the, say, savory flavor that most fatty products have. It's also a sensation that's satisfying for people as they eat. And we know this from doing from blind taste testing and things of this kind, even would say children or others that would not have the language and the vocabulary, right, to make a difference between whether something was fatty or sugary. And so what they'll do when you see low fat is they've generally substituted sugar. So that's sort of one of those signals, right? And then if I see sugar free on a label, I almost certainly know that that product's going to have artificial sweeteners. And if I see heart healthy, in general, what that means is the product is low in sodium. That's sort of the criteria that's used, but it could have all kinds of other stuff in it. And so that's not necessarily a litmus test for what defines healthy. One of the reasons I think you and I need to be doing this show and talking to people is just to give people a fighting chance, because these companies are doing focus groups and they're paying attention to pop trends and how people talk. And so it's really interesting. So I've got this top 10 list. And some of these are things that we've spoken about, but I'm going to give people sort of a quantifying way to think about it. So for example, number one is people think a diet soda or a 0-calorie soda, right? You'll see that on a label. You'll see, for example, like a Diet Coke, or you see Zero Coke, or Coke Zero, I think is the actual title. And so if you're a diabetic or you're someone trying to cut your calories, you immediately think to yourself, okay, that's going to be good for me because it doesn't have sugar in it. Problem is this: artificial sweeteners, which are going to constitute the body of flavor that you find in those products, one, they mess with your hormones. And so for a person that drinks a lot of diet sodas, they can find they go on these binges, these eating binges. This is sort of a real dynamic. And that's because it kind of messes with their hormones. And very often the things that they're craving are not the good stuff, right? They're mostly craving things like chips and not craving apples. The other thing about artificially sweetened products is they trick your brain, right? You drink it and you have a sensation of sweetness, and that sensation runs through your brain. But here's the challenge with that. Now your pancreas makes excess amounts of insulin in preparation for managing the glucose once that food digests in your guts, and the rise of glucose in your bloodstream that's going to occur because it sensed a sweetness and a sugar. Well, that glucose has to come from somewhere, or has to do something, I should say. And so now it's most likely going to take the proteins or other things and try to turn them into a fat. You can actually find that the body will create fat where fat doesn't exist, because it takes whatever carbohydrates it can find to try to do that with. And then long term, the problem is that if your pancreas is constantly producing excess amounts of insulin, it will enlarge. And just like an enlarged heart isn't good for somebody, an enlarged pancreas isn't good for somebody. And most people that have, in the Western, or I should say the developed parts of the world, that have habits where they're eating a lot of fast food, which is most everybody, they'll actually have, if you take autopsies, they'll have enlarged pancreases, as many as 3 times the normal size. So, and they're not efficient. So this is one thing that contributes to this rising rate of type 2 diabetes in the developed parts of the world. And then the last thing about sodas is they damage the gut. They don't promote a healthy growth of the flora. And so one of the sort of postulations or theories out there about this rise of leaky gut in our society, it's about all the artificial sweeteners and flavors that people are exposed to through processed food. And anything that has a negative impact on your microbiome, you should avoid. And so these are all things that you're drinking diet soda thinking it will help you lose weight, and in fact it can make you gain weight. Number 2 on the list are vegetable oils. And what I'm particularly talking about are refined vegetable oils. And so that's things like canola, soy, even cottonseed. There's some communities that actually cook with cottonseed oil. Corn oil itself also really fits into that category. The challenge with all of those are, one, they're generally coming from a genetically modified organism or plant. So these are generally going to be GMOs. And the things to think about with GMOs, right? Principally, the 2 genetic modifications they're doing is, one, to make sure that the plant itself can survive the spraying of pesticides in the field. So farmers, you might imagine, right? They'd like to be able to spray their pesticides to get rid of the pest and other things, herbicides or whatever, to get rid of the weed control, things of that nature, without it damaging the plant. Well, they genetically modify something like corn so that it can be sprayed with Roundup, which is the trade name for glyphosate. The problem is a residue remains. And so glyphosate, for example, is something that we actually find not just in rivers and streams and soil and food, including things like breakfast cereal that are sold in grocery stores. It's actually in the rain. So there's been so much glyphosate used or Roundup used, both by individual persons and commercial farming, that it's just pervasive, right? Not a good idea, though. And one of the other genetic modifications they do is they modify the genes so that one of the proteins in a plant becomes insecticidal, which means if eaten by insecticides, they would die. Well, there's just all kinds of questions that raises, right? So for example, 25 or 30 years of eating foods that have been modified in that way, what do we know about what that really does to human beings? And so quite literally, it feels as though we are a living experiment from all of these processed foods and the chemicals that go in them. So one is artificial sweeteners. Number two is the refined vegetable oils. Fat-free products, I spoke about that. Just sort of keep in mind that this trend of seeing something that says fat-free, one caution is that it most likely means there's sugars, as I mentioned earlier. But at the same time, I just want everybody to hear me on this, right? You need fat for survival. Your brain needs fat. You need it for your gallbladder to work properly. Now, you don't need too much fat, and you don't need a lot of bad fats that are out there, but we need fat, right? Fat is a thing that we need for the very survival of our race. And so, and generally what happens is when you're eating these low-fat things, you're just trading out for the sugar. And the truth is, and this was interesting, there's been research done by Dr. Mark Hyman at Cleveland Clinic, and it's research done by others that basically says that the body's going to turn sugar into fat. So this notion that if I don't eat fat, I won't gain weight is untrue, because the miracle of the body's chemistry is it makes what it needs. And utilizing the production of insulin in the pancreas and other body chemistry, it's going to turn excess amounts of sugar into fat. So anyway, hopefully people will sort of hear me on that one. Number 4 are processed fruit juices. And, I realize that intuitively, we would tend to think, well, if I can't have soda, I'll have fruit juice. And there's some truth to that thinking, right? Because fruit juices, if they're properly prepared, they should have some micronutrients to it, right? Certainly something you wouldn't find in a soda. The challenge is, the bigger issue is the amount of sugars in them. So when you take a fruit, let's take apples, for example. Now, if you go and eat an apple, you're going to get all kinds of nutrients out of the skin, out of the meat of the apple, where you find the pectin, the things that gives it its girth, its weight. And you're also going to find some sugar, right? But there's so much fiber in an apple that it restricts the rate at which it digests in the belly and makes your glucose go up. Well, what happens if you pull the apple apart? If you press it, get rid of all the cellulose, all the fibrous material, all of the pectin, the skin, and you're just left with the juice. That juice is quite literally like concentrated sugar. And so when you ingest it, it's going to spike your blood sugars and spike them more rapidly than even a candy bar would. When people give sort of unlimited access of juice to their infants or their children, which they're trying to satisfy the child, they don't realize they're actually setting that child up to crave sugars in a way that's not healthy. One good practice you could do, and I have to admit, I like flavor. I'm not a person that doesn't want to have flavor, so I actually have a real affinity for orange juice. And if I can get it, I really love fresh squeezed orange juice, but I also know it's a lot of sugar. And in fact, in most cases, ounce for ounce, orange juice has as much sugar, this is also true of apple juice, as you find in a regular soft drink, just to kind of give you an idea of the amount of sugar that we're dealing with here. So I'll take a couple of ounces of orange juice and I'll mix it with 10 or 12 ounces of carbonated water, soda water, sparkling water, what happens to be available. And sure, it's not as sweet as if I was having a whole glass of orange juice, but I've got an orange juice flavor. And I've been doing that so long, Pari, that I don't even think about it. And I don't even think I could drink orange juice, right? It would just feel too sweet for me. So a lot of this is about developing some practices. If these are important issues to you, developing some practices, because just in and of itself, processed fruit juice, generally what you're buying in the grocery store, has also been pasteurized for safety, which means now most of the micronutrients in it have been denatured. Pasteurization means that it gets up to 185 degrees Fahrenheit, even if it's flash pasteurization, it's still denaturing those micronutrients. And so that's number 4 is the processed juices. And then number 5 are strawberries. Now, the poor strawberry, I know everybody thinks of the strawberry as super healthy, and in and of themselves, strawberries really are a healthy fruit. But it turns out the way strawberries are principally grown and their structure, they're very difficult to clean if they've been grown in a conventional environment with herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides. And there's an organization in the US called the Environmental Working Group, and they have strawberries actually on their top list every year of fruits that have toxic pesticide residues. And so strawberries are fantastic, but I just encourage people to buy them, enjoy them that are organic, because it's a fruit that's very difficult to wash the herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides that you find utilized, particularly a ground growing plant like a strawberry. They're going to have a heavy fungicide based on there to keep the funguses from growing. And so it's going to get into the fruit. So it's something to be considerate of. Number 6 are protein bars. And it's, again, one of those things where on the surface you look and think, oh, I'll have a protein bar, right? And maybe you'll have that instead of a candy bar. The challenge is the vast majority of them are filled with all kinds of corn syrups or brown rice syrups. They're basically syrups that are concentrated sugars. They may not say high corn fructose additives or things of that nature, but when you start to look at their calories, the calorie counts and the amount of sugars are nearly what you would find in a commercial candy bar. Additionally, a lot of them have a lot of artificial flavors and colors. And if you look at their manufacturing, very often these protein bars are manufactured by people that are making candy bars. And so it's a little bit deceptive. Now, just to be clear, not all protein bars fit into this category. And if you nose around a little bit in the grocery store and you pay a little attention, read some labels, you're going to find there are some good products out there. And so I just encourage people to develop a little bit of an understanding of the protein bar market. There are several products out there that are good and clean. The people at Cliff Bar, most of their product line is good and clean. I've gotten to know a little bit about them through the Organic Trade Association that we're involved with. They seem to be a company that's, kind of committed to these kinds of things, but pay attention. Protein bars are kind of a buyer beware thing. Number 7 are gluten-free snacks. So gluten is interesting. Most people that are gluten intolerant, it tends to be that their intolerance shows up when they're eating highly processed flours. Even flours, for example, some of these pizza companies out there, these pizza deliver companies out there that are common really in Asia as well as the US and Europe, they're using high concentrate gluten crust. And so a lot of people have eaten this stuff for so long, they've developed an intolerance to it, right? It's a man-made chemical. The body struggles to deal with it. And so they turn to gluten-free snacks, which, the idea or the notion there is pretty good. However, in many instances, what they've substituted for the gluten is they've substituted rice, which if it's not rice that's carefully monitored, it can have high levels of arsenic. And just because a snack says that it's gluten-free doesn't mean that the amount of sugar in it and the amount of artificial colors and flavorings in it aren't just as bad as a gluten version of that same snack. So gluten-free products tend to be very highly processed and manufactured. So these same issues that we struggle with are there as well. So that's why I say, it looks like it's a healthy food and you think you should eat it, but you've got to have a buyer beware attitude. Number 8 are farm-raised fishes, or fish, I should say. And that one, you certainly understand there's a lot of people that try to substitute or work to substitute, I should say, seafood as a protein source instead of, say, pork or chicken or beef that they have concerns about. But you've got to make sure that you're looking at wild-caught, sustainable sources. You want to understand where it's coming from, because you can find the farm-raised fish products to have just as much herbicide, pesticides as you might think of commercially grown fruits or vegetables. And so it's like anything, you can take an idea and you tell somebody, oh, it's farm raised, it's going to be free of the heavy metals that you find in the ocean, but it turns out that's actually not the case, particularly if it's farm raised, something like salmon or others. And so again, we got to be careful. Number 9 is margarine. And margarine is interesting. It's not as popular as it once was, but I still notice people will look at margarine and immediately think of something as being heart healthy, and that's because it doesn't have saturated fats. However, it has trans fats, which basically they take the normal fat molecules in margarine and they introduce at high temperature, can be as high as 400 degrees Fahrenheit. They introduce a hydrogen molecule into that fat, and they do that to make it more durable, so that if it's used over and over, let's say in a commercial kitchen frying things, it doesn't fall apart and become rancid. Oil overused can fall apart and then become rancid quite rapidly. And so margarine is a man-made oil that essentially was designed to be heart healthy, but it turns out it creates a greater risk because of the trans fat. So, and it's most of the time made from GMO-based vegetables such as corn. So it's one of those things to be careful of. And then maybe my last bit of bad news, I feel like I'm the bad news bear on this show sometimes. Number 10 is non-organic yogurt. And so often, you know, we hear about, and it's true, yogurt can be very healthy. There's a lot of microbials and probiotics and things that are found in a good yogurt product. However, a lot of yogurt, if you look at the amount of sugar in it, it's just like having a dessert. And the packaging and the coloring and the artificial sweeteners, if they don't have a lot of sugar and it says, oh, sugar free, immediately start looking for the artificial sweeteners. Now, there are yogurts that are good. And what I encourage people to do is, if you like yogurt, and I happen to like yogurt, it's something that I eat on a regular basis. I buy a plain, zero fat organic yogurt. Now, I know that sounds super boring to everybody, but what I do is I put a handful of fruit, vegetables, nuts, or vegetables, excuse me, not vegetables, fruits such as blueberries, organic strawberries, organic pineapple. I'll do something like that. And then I'll sort of mash it up, and that becomes my flavor source. And then I'll throw some nuts in there, which give me some fat. So I've got that balance of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, which people are looking for. So yogurt can be good. It can be a healthy source of protein and other rich nutrients in your diet. Just be careful of non-organic yogurts and look at the label for the sugar. So that's sort of the dirty 10 for people to be cautious of. And, you know, hopefully I didn't take away somebody's favorite food. And almost all of these things that I'm talking about have a healthy source as well. You just got to be cautious about how much manufacturing goes into the food you're eating.
Very, very interesting, Eddie. And I have some questions, Eddie. So is it better for us to eat fresh fruits instead of pressed juice or, you know, blend juice?
No question. Eating the fresh fruits and vegetables is better than the juice, because you're getting the fiber, you're getting the micronutrients that are found in the skin and the cellulose of the fruit. And it's also that fiber or pectin, whatever happens to be, is also restricting the rate at which the glucose breaks down in the gut, so that your blood sugar levels rise slower, which is more easy for the body to manage. So absolutely, eating things whole is the answer. Now, keep in mind, some things are high glycemic because they break down very rapidly in your body. So you can be cautious with them. So for example, people that eat, say, a banana on an empty stomach, which is a common practice, right? Because people think, oh, a banana, that's good for you. And bananas do have a lot of tremendous nutrients. However, they break down so rapidly in your gut, almost as fast as, say, a piece of toast, that they can make your blood glucose levels rise too fast and create an over response of insulin, which will actually then sequester some of that sugar into fat. And so you need to pay attention to these high glycemic fruits and vegetables. A carrot falls into the same category. Carrots are very easily digested by the body. Glucose goes up rapidly. And so those are things that you want to eat with other items that have fiber to just kind of restrict how quickly it makes your glucose go up, or just limit your serving size.
And then many people say, like when we drink juice, you know, with plenty of juice and vegetable that we can get all nutrients and vitamins. So, but instead of taking only one or two fruits, so we can't compare to that. So, what do you recommend?
Well, so I understand the logic of this dilemma, right? Because and I'm an advocate for eating whole fruits and vegetables, non processed foods, ultra processed foods. If you hear this show, I'm not for people over consuming that kind of stuff. At the same time, everything needs to be considered in balance, right? So you can eat too many fruits and vegetables and wind up with a lot of sugar in a meal or a diet. So you gotta pace yourself. That's why, to me, for people to look for balance, a blend of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, so you've got this mix of things going into your gut. In most cases, people are buying organic and they're really thinking about it, 3 meals a day, they can find enough micronutrients for their body to work properly. But if you find that you're compromising meals, you eat on the go, you're not able to fully pay attention to the quality of what you're eating, then that's the role of supplements. I believe in supplements being a supplement to your current health habits to get you closer to where you want to be. It's not designed to replace good eating habits. It's just a supplement when your eating habits aren't where they should be for total health.
Uh-huh. And talking back to about oil, is coconut oil safe? It's not processed, right? I don't know if they process it these days.
It can be processed, and it can even be processed with hydrogen molecules, right? So coconut oil that's virgin, organic, and non-processed has a lot of wonderful qualities. You just need to be aware of what you're buying.
Mm-hmm. Still more questions. Here in Thailand, it's very popular now about stevia, like a sweetener stevia. Is it okay to take? But when I look at the label, it's like 2.5%. The rest is like multi syrup. So I'm not sure now.
Stevia, I think, is a better alternative to something like aspartame. However, stevia has its own set of issues. And so is it organically sourced? Are they using the whole leaf? And so it's something where you can't food manufacturers will cut corners when they can. And all stevia is not created equally. And you still get into the same problem where stevia is a very sweet taste. And so you still can get into the issue where the brain, because of the way your body's interpreted what you're eating, thinks, oh my gosh, we just ate something really sweet. We need to make a lot of insulin to manage this when it goes into the gut. That's really one of the biggest complaints about these artificial sweeteners are they're just so concentrated. You put a little bit of on your tongue and you're like, wow, that's really sweet. And so your body reacts that way. And so it can't be all that you consume unless you're a type 1 diabetic under really the guide and control of a good physician, someone giving you advice, a nutritionist or somebody, and you've got to zero out the sugar in your diet, then these things really need to be not too much. Don't consume too much of them because it's just something that's just not good for the body.
And how about maple syrup? The same thing?
Well, maple syrup is an interesting sweetener. It's got a lot of positive qualities. There's a lot of, if it's good maple syrup, it's got an interesting micronutrient profile, but it's a sweet. And so it has to be moderation. Just like honey, honey can have tremendous positive impact on people. There's a lot of people that have allergies to airborne pollutants, natural pollutants, say in the air, such as pollen in the spring. They can spend a couple of pollen seasons eating local honey and almost like homeopathy, giving their body a little minor dose of this pollen, and find themselves 2 or 3 years later without any sort of hay fever or other issues. And so honey is good in that regard, but at the same time, too much honey isn't. So it's like everything where you've got to have moderation and you've got to be careful when what you're consuming is concentrated. I'll give you an example of that. It depends on what kind of soft drink we're talking about. But let's say you're talking about a fairly typical 12-ounce cola. Depending upon which brand it is, it's going to have anywhere from 10 to 12 tablespoons of sugar if you look at an equivalency. or excuse me, teaspoons of sugar. So that's a lot, right? And if you had a glass of something and then you had that much sugar here, you would never think about having that much sugar. So you got to be careful that in the food manufacturing process, they don't concentrate down all those sugars, so you don't realize what you're consuming. That's why it's an awareness issue as much as anything.
And the last question about, you were talking about the protein bar, right? And how about whey protein that people take to build muscles? Is that okay?
I'm not a giant fan of whey protein because it's very acidic. Whey protein has become very inexpensive. If a protein manufacturer like ourselves, we could introduce a whey protein with as much protein as our organic super protein made from plants at probably a third of the cost, because in the manufacturing of yogurt, they a side material that they discard is whey protein. The trouble is they've removed and isolated all of the whole nutrients found in it. So it's an isolate, plain and simple, and difficult for the body to recognize. And so it's easy for people to overconsume protein when taking it into a concentrated powder form. So I'm not a massive fan of something like that doesn't have other nutrients in it. If it's a quality product that's a blended set of ingredients and you can learn something about the manufacturing, the challenge is most of the whey protein out there is quite cheap. For those that are even more curious about it, you can go to thegoodinside.com, hit the community tab, and on the blog you can search whey protein, and we've got a couple different articles that talk about whey protein. We'll provide you some education on the subject matter of if you're going to buy it, how to buy it, but also give you some things to think about compared to, say, pea protein.
Yeah, I tried vegan protein from your company. The taste is so good. Drink with green juice, that's perfect.
I think it's perfect too. Thank you. We don't use anything artificial there, no artificial sweeteners, and it has just enough sweet, but not too much. So thank you. I agree. I love the flavor too.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eddie, for today. It's very, very useful as usual. So we'll see you again next time. Okay.
Thank you, Pari.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.